Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into something absolutely epic. We're looking at one of the most profound psychological blueprints ever recorded. Seriously, this isn't just ancient history. It's literally the ultimate modern guide for resilience, survival, and psychological triumph. We're going to decode the story of Joseph, treating it as an absolute masterclass in human psychology.
Here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. Just wow. Imagine the sudden, visceral shock of hearing those words. This isn't some enemy army, right? This is the voice of Joseph's own flesh and blood. 10 of his brothers plotting a literal murder out of pure, venomous jealousy, just over a beautiful robe and a few ambitious dreams. Which brings us to a deeply personal question. And maybe you've asked yourself this. How do you survive the ultimate betrayal and rebuild from absolute rock bottom? Now, you and I might never be thrown into a literal dry cistern in the desert, but the psychological experience of the pit, that is universal. It's that sudden job loss, a devastating divorce, an unexpected financial ruin. You know the feeling, the floor drops out and everything you thought was secure just vanishes in an instant. To understand how to rebuild from that, we first need to look at the architecture of total devastation, and just how fast life can transition from absolute security to a complete freefall. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of Rock Bottom. The Architecture of Fall. Let's look at how fast this all happens. At age 17, Joseph is the favored son. He's secure, wearing this beautiful, special robe of honor from his father Jacob. But within days, he is violently stripped of that robe, which was basically his entire identity, and thrown into a dark cistern at Dothan. And it gets worse. Shortly after, his brothers pull him up, but only to sell him to Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver. So by the end of this incredibly short journey, he's standing in a foreign slave market purchased by a guy named Potiphar down in Egypt. He's been completely stripped of his identity, his security, and his agency. Just gone. And this catastrophic sequence perfectly defines what it actually means to hit rock bottom. It's a sudden, devastating loss of security and identity, often triggered by some unforeseen betrayal, forcing you to rebuild your entire reality from scratch. Joseph's ancient fall mirrors that modern psychological trauma perfectly, having your entire world pulled out from under you. You are literally no longer who you were yesterday. So how do you behave when you're trapped in entirely unfair, malicious circumstances? Let's move to our next section where the true psychological grit of our protagonist is really put to the test. Chapter 2. Surviving the Pit. Internal versus External. Notice the sheer contrast here between Joseph's external and internal worlds. Externally, his reality is an absolute nightmare. He's a slave owned by the captain of Pharaoh's guard at the total mercy of a foreign system. But internally, he completely retains his agency. He outright refuses to become a victim. Instead, he becomes a diligent worker, takes responsibility for literally everything he touches, and most importantly, he absolutely refuses to compromise his core integrity. But consider where that integrity actually leads him. Because of his incredible work ethic, he gets elevated to the head of Potiphar's entire household. A huge win, right? Well, then Potiphar's wife attempts to seduce him. Driven by his worldview and faith, Joseph refuses. He says it would be a massive sin against God and a total betrayal of his master's trust. So her revenge? She falsely accuses him of assault. Joseph is punished for doing the exact right thing, and he is thrown straight into the royal dungeon. It's a catastrophic second betrayal. And honestly, it's a perfect mirror to the systemic unfairness so many of us experience today when doing the right thing goes completely unrewarded. It brings us into the void. Like, how do you maintain hope in the darkest of places when the system itself has locked you away unjustly?
Chapter 3. Purpose in Prison, Waiting in the Dark.
13. It was 13 agonizing years between Joseph's initial enslavement at age 17 and his eventual rise to power at age 30. 13 years of being a slave and a prisoner. The sheer psychological endurance required for that level of resilience is just staggering. So in the dungeon, Joseph is locked up with Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, and both of these guys have disturbing dreams. Now, instead of wallowing in his own misery, which he totally had the right to do, Joseph uses his unique gifts to help them out. He interprets the cupbearer's dream of a vine to mean restoration, and the baker's dream of birds to mean execution. And the reality? It happens exactly as he predicted. But here is the psychological kicker. The restored cupbearer completely forgets about Joseph for 2 full years. 2 whole years. Yet Joseph just continued to find purpose by helping others, even in the middle of his own suffering. But eventually, preparation meets opportunity. Pharaoh himself starts having these haunting dreams. 7 scrawny cows eating 7 fat cows, and 7 blighted heads of grain swallowing 7 plump ones. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembers Joseph, so he's brought before the most powerful man on earth. And Joseph doesn't just interpret the dream, saying it means 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of severe famine. No, he steps up with a massive strategic plan. He tells Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to save 1/5 of the harvest during the good years so they can survive the bad. A total game changer.
Pharaoh is absolutely astounded by this wisdom. Instantly, the prisoner is elevated. Pharaoh takes his own signet ring, puts it on Joseph's finger, and makes him second in command of the entire Egyptian empire. He even gives him a new name, Zaphenath-Paneah, meaning the savior of the land. Literally, in one day, 13 years of darkness are completely inverted. But surviving rock bottom isn't just about achieving success, it's about resolving that initial trauma.
Chapter 4. Forgiveness Architecture, Resolving Trauma. So, the famine strikes the whole world, and guess who walks into Joseph's court begging to buy grain? Yup, the 10 brothers who threw him in the pit. Joseph recognizes them immediately, but they have no idea this powerful Egyptian governor is their brother. And what follows proves that true forgiveness isn't just some instant amnesia, it's a very careful, deeply psychological process. First, you have the shock. Then, the test. He accuses them of being spies and holds Simeon captive. Third, the demand. To prove their story, they have to go back and get their youngest brother Benjamin. And finally, the assessment. Joseph secretly plants his silver cup in Benjamin's sack, framing him. When the brothers are dragged back, Joseph threatens to enslave Benjamin. And that is when Judah, the exact same brother who once suggested selling Joseph in the first place, steps forward. He offers his own life to save the boy and spare their father's heart.
This is huge because it brilliantly illustrates a core concept. True forgiveness requires recognizing transformation. Joseph doesn't just blindly forgive the men who tried to kill him. He tests their boundaries. It's only after Judah demonstrates profound, selfless growth and a complete reversal of his past cruelty that Joseph finally breaks down. He clears the room, weeps, and declares, "I am Joseph." So how was Joseph actually able to achieve this incredible level of peace? Well, we find the answer in our final chapter.
Chapter 5. Reframing Trauma. Ultimate Synthesis.
Take a second to compare the brothers' original intent with Joseph's ultimate realization. The brothers' intent was pure jealousy, harm, betrayal, and just the total erasure of the dreamer. It was traumatic, it was malicious. But Joseph takes this entire agonizing journey and completely recontextualizes it. He realizes it wasn't just meaningless suffering. It was actually a necessary journey orchestrated to position him to save entire nations from starvation, not to mention preserving his own family's life. This right here is the absolute psychological superpower of cognitive reframing.
Joseph crystallizes the superpower in one of the most famous statements of antiquity. Standing right there before the brothers who ruined his youth, he says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good." By adopting this worldview, Joseph completely transcends his status as a victim. He literally takes the worst thing that ever happened to him and weaves it into a narrative of ultimate purpose.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to take away from this explainer today. How can you reframe the pit you are currently facing into a narrative of profound purpose? Joseph's story proves that the pit absolutely doesn't have to be your grave. With internal agency, relentless integrity, and a willingness to completely reframe your trauma, your rock bottom can actually become the exact foundation upon which your greatest triumph is built. Keep learning, keep reframing, and we'll see you next time.